What's going on, everybody? Ken here, also known as Silent85. Welcome to another vlog. I'm on a total binge today. I'm doing these during my breaks, but I've just mentally and in my heart, there's things that I've been wanting to say as separate but contributing videos to my overall growth as a man, as a human being, as a YouTuber. And I like to take these opportunities to really present what I have to say, obviously, here on my channel. As a possibility of that maybe it'll help folks along their journey. Um, and what I wanted to talk about here was being a preacher, being an evangelist, being a Christian man's son. A man that was very involved in the Christian community. Helped in churches, sang in churches, had an outreach, had an evangelical upbringing. Both of my parents did, but my dad especially. In recent years, he had formed more than a few projects contributing to the Christian community. And so, a lot of people, I don't know about everybody else, or I say a lot of people, but I don't know. Well, I don't know about everybody else. But what I can say is that being the son of the man that I was, through my primary years, had its ups and downs. It had its ups and downs. My father was not perfect. Neither of my parents were perfect, but Dad, in the conversations we had and in the exchanges we had early on, was to a Christian extent, actually, from what I can remember, not totally hardcore. He taught me certain things. He taught us certain things about upbringing. We went to church. There was another family member that was very hardcore. Unfortunately, was my abuser, but we won't go into that. I'm mostly sticking to my father here. But again, the early exchanges, the early conversations. He loved to sing. He loved to preach. He loved to give a message through the Bible, a positive message. Unfortunately, when it came to the home life, he wasn't perfect. Mistakes were made. He could take on a different vibe around and with certain people, and it was mostly because of alcohol or his very own early upbringing. But as he got older, as he matured and he became a father, a more involved father, I should say, because there was a lot of times in my life when he wasn't there when I needed him to be. So I now have an adopted father in my life throughout that started, late into my teens, that really helped me become more the man I am today. But, my biological father was there, thankfully, in these later years. He had learned, he had adapted, he had evolved. But he still kept his faith the best he could, but again, he wasn't perfect. And, let that be said, no Christian is perfect. No human being is perfect. And I've qualified myself in recent years as agnostic. I'm eventually coming to the decision that I'm agnostic atheist, because while I may not believe in like a physical God or a substantial God that is working his way through reality, I do believe that everybody has their belief structure or their personification, inner personification of what gives them strength, hope, and faith. For me, it's me. It's humanity. It's the universe. But for Dad, it was God, and he did what he could to spread a message, while at the same time, I could be wrong on this, and if I am, maybe he will eternally forgive me of this, and I'm pretty sure he would. But at the same time, he also tried to do it in such a way that he could support his family. A lot of churches nowadays, unfortunately, in my experience, there's a lot of churches that just do it for the money. They're just trying to sell faith. They're just trying to sell hope. But Dad lived a lifestyle that agreed with his piety, I think in some regards, he was materialistic, don't get me wrong, but um, he did what he could to really spread his message and spread his faith. But at the same time, the way he lived his life in that regard was not the best way to bring up kids or to have a family. I love my father, but there was a lot of times in my life and in my siblings to where things could have been better when it comes to a roof over our head or food or whatnot. Now, don't get me wrong, he provided. He did his damnedest to provide while at the same time trying to spread a message that he had as a Christian. But what it was like coming up for me, I'm the oldest of 7. What it was like coming up for me in the exchanges I had with him could be all over the place, and I'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, so getting back to it, I had to take a little bit of a break, but um, I don't say any of this to discount my father or to put him on a pedestal. Essentially, what I'm getting to is that my father, as I said before, wasn't perfect, but he was a Christian man. He was a fluid Christian man, and by that I mean he, for the most part, was understanding, especially when it came to me, especially with engaging in me, because he knew that I was an intellectual. I was constantly critically thinking. I was constantly analyzing. I was constantly growing mentally. I was trying to develop. Even at an early age, I was always questioning and wanting to know, very, very curious. And so he never, he was one of the few people in my life that never, including my mother and my adopted father, that never pushed me anyway. He didn't. When it came to the philosophical stuff and the thinking and whatnot, to memory, he never forced me a single way. He actually always engaged with me on that level. He was a man of faith, but he was also a critical thinker as well, and he was always coming up with scenarios that he would introduce me to and ask me what I thought about it. So it was really odd because most of the people I encountered of faith in my life, again, aside from my parents, they were very devout. A good majority of them didn't really acknowledge any kind of outside Christianity thoughts or plans or ideas. Everything went by God. It was always God. God was always the source. They were always the answer, and he was forevermore. But thankfully, my folks weren't like that, and Dad was a decent source, especially in the later years, of being a bit of a mirror image of who I wanted or who I could be, who I wanted to be. That part of him. Like I said, unfortunately, he struggled with alcohol. He struggled with diabetes. He struggled physically, and he struggled with more than a few things in his life. But 70%, 80% of the time, again, especially in the later years, when it came to me, and it's hard to say for my other siblings, but I can only guess that there was a lot of times in my life and in their lives when he was a fun dad. He was an understanding father, when he wanted to be. When he wanted to be. And it's funny, I think as the oldest, I got to see the full gamut of how he changed and who he became. Because coming up, Dad reacted a lot of ways negatively, borderline abusive with us as kids. With partners, I won't really speak on that, but with me as a kid, there was definitely severe levels of wanting to teach us lessons, and he could definitely be very he had his ways of doing things that was pretty hardcore at times, and did get a little physical. There was whoopings. Obviously there was a belt involved. I don't remember so much a Switch, not a Nintendo Switch, unfortunately, not back in those days, but my grandmother, he grew up where you were made to go get a switch off a tree, and the way it was put to me one time, beat your ass with it, And again, this was really before a more general societal understanding of what this could do to kids, what overuse of spanking a kid can do to them. Um, so anyway, that was his upbringing. That's the way he was raised, and a lot of times you'll find in people of faith that's where it comes from. 90% of people of faith grew up around it, and that's what they were taught. That's what they've known. So I think with my father, what was really admirable was that he was a critical thinker. He was a smart guy, who made some questionable decisions in his life. I will say that much. But my siblings were never one of them. He loved his kids. He had trouble showing it in the right ways sometimes, and especially knowing how to be a good father, especially again early on. But at the same time, like I said earlier, his lifestyle, his wanting to spread a good message and be what he was brought up to be, left things wanting in certain areas. But what I was getting to is what most impressive about my father. He's a critical thinker. He was intelligent. He was smart, but again, bad decisions on some parts. But yet, what I found the most impressive about him was that despite all that, his faith in what he was raised to believe and what he did believe. Two things. Number one, he never put that on me. He never said, you are going to be in my line of doing what I do. That's how I'm going to raise you. That's how it'll always be. And if you try to go anywhere else, I'll disown you. It was never like that. It was never that extreme. And thankfully, it didn't even approach that. It wasn't even in the neighborhood. But he was a man of faith. He was a man of critical thinking. He was a man of intelligence. So he was able to balance both of those. And you'll see that in a lot of people, in Christians. You will find very intelligent Christians that can critical think, but their strength is their faith, and they find it. They find it in faith in their deity, faith in their God, faith in their system, in their church, and whatnot. But what I'll always appreciate about my father is that, again, he allowed me to be who I am. Again, despite his upbringing, despite the rough times he had to go through because of his parents. And this was a man that didn't know his actual father. My father never knew his biological father. He might have met him once or twice as a very young kid, but from what I've been told, this is a man that his father was not around. In fact, there was the conflicting stories I was told coming up about my biological grandfather on my dad's side. There was talk of him being found shot in the back of a Volkswagen. There was, him potentially owing money to the mob. It's hard to say. I think somewhere along the line, my biological grandfather, whoever it was, whoever made this decision or never gave actual pertinent information, although I have had uncles tell me one thing as well, but I've heard stories other ways as well. It's hard to say, but obviously my father never really knew his biological father, and so coming up with that and coming up with the things that he grew up around because of certain people in his life that I won't go into, but he saw things and he experienced things that I think left a lot of questions in his life that he did the best he could to answer. He did the best he could to adapt. I think it's a real primary excuse for its alcoholism as well, because alcohol allowed him to escape the reality that he was in, and that was dangerous. I've often equivocated drinking in some regards to belief systems, because you have to escape, you have to believe in something, you have to find solace in something. Unfortunately, drinking, as compared to like a belief system, can have very negative consequences, more material, more substantial, obviously. His alcoholism did have impact on my childhood. I do have memories of him drinking, helping him drinking with partners. And it didn't necessarily cause the darkest moments in my life, but it didn't exactly help either. So, he had his downfalls, he had his weaknesses, he had his vices, just like we all do. But overall, coming up the son of a preacher, of an evangelist, of a missionary, and later in years, a very, just a great man who had a very questionable, borderline dark past, who had a very rough history with partners, who had a very rough history with family. He inspired me and impressed me in a lot of ways, while at the same time he was a source of some grief in my life and some absence, maybe even some father issues along the way. But with that said, he was an important part of my life. He passed 2 years ago. And what you learn coming up as I did is that he was just a very good example of there can be intelligent human beings, critically thinking human beings, that can identify with their faith and can adopt it and want to spread a message. And again, I saw things throughout his life that he wasn't perfect. He made some choices when it came to his faith, and he made some remarks, especially on Facebook, because Facebook is notorious for having family blocking family. But things were said, things were exchanged, but overall, 75 to 80% of the memories of my father, ratio-wise, good to bad, are good memories, are positive memories. But there is obviously memories there, much like every other, I believe, son or a daughter of their father. So whether it's adopted father, biological father, whatever it may be, he was definitely an influence in my life, and a bit of a pillar as well. So anyway, again, coming up as I did as a preacher's son, there were challenges, especially with how I live my life now as an agnostic atheist. That's how I'm, currently going towards, and I'll go over that in another video. I've been doing all these today, but in another video I'll go over my mother and talk about her a bit, and how she has been one of the strongest and most caring pillars in my life, and who I, due to circumstances lately, I am stepping up for and really trying my damnedest as a son to see it through, that she has a comfortable later life. That's what I'm calling a later life, not after retirement, as much as I can help it. I'm doing the same for my folks. I tried to do the same for my dad before his passing. But dad was stubborn in a lot of ways. I kind of get that from him, but I more get my personality traits from my mother more than anything. But Dad has given me a good bit, and he helped me express myself in so many ways, despite coming from the upbringing that he did, and the emotional scarring that he witnessed. I can't get into stories, but I can tell you that the things I've heard and the things I know, I'm amazed this man was able to keep his sanity. Him and his brothers. And his sister. Because I'll tell you, everybody goes through their darkness as a kid. I know I did. And to be able to live a life and have kids and have partners, you won't be perfect, and mistakes will be made. But I think what's important is that if you realize, as he did later in life, the mistakes you did make that caused rifts where they appeared, and you can look for example, he looked me in the eye and he apologized. He said, I wasn't a perfect father, and I'm sorry I wasn't there. And he knew, he knew that he had a mission in life to do what he felt he needed to do, and he knew that it caused pain with his family, and it caused things to happen that he didn't want to happen. He knows that his drinking did the same thing, and the choices he made, especially as his younger self. But a couple of years before his death, he talked to me as the oldest, and he wanted to say he was proud of me, and that he just apologized profusely for not being able to be there for the missed birthdays, for the missed whatever else it may have been. And I said thank you to him for allowing me to be who I was as a kid, and to constantly question and to constantly be curious without reprimand of being raised the way he did. He obviously learned, he utilized his mental faculties in life, and he didn't remain willfully ignorant and try to impose that. There's so many kids that go through that. There's so many kids that have parents that forced their beliefs on them, and it can mentally cripple you as you get older. I've seen people my age just remain ignorant of reality and don't acknowledge what's going on around them, and they just, I love my father so much for not doing that to me. And this may sound like a bit of an unimportant detail that I'm going over when it comes to that, but you got to realize the last 5 to 8 years of my life has been nothing but a journey of rediscovery of myself and what I wanted to be and the kid I was, because I was forced into a role to survive. And it caused so much instability in my life. So much instability with the way that things happened in my childhood. But my parents were there, They did the best damn thing they could, and they're human. But I'll always love them, and I miss my father. I really do. I currently have plans to take him up to Oregon. He was cremated. He always wanted to make it back to Oregon. My siblings and myself have his ashes in vials, but I am the caretaker of the majority of the rest of his remains, and I'm going to be taking them to Oregon, and we're going to find a cliff, and I'm going to turn him into the wind, make him a part of the earth again. They broke the mold when they made my father, and my father made some dark and bad mistakes, but thankfully for the most part I have, again, especially with the later years, positive things that have overridden the dark things in the past. Anyway, I hope this helps. It was a bit of a inner reflection as well as a outline of who my father was and what it's like being a preacher's son. Went to church, taught the Bible, sang Christian songs, but overall, he was a preacher, he was a missionary, he was an evangelist, but he was a really good father. And I can only hope that anybody who's in the situation I was coming up, that they could say the same, because a lot of kids can't. And they're denied being who they want to be because people are brought up a certain way. Anyway, stay safe, stay sane. Remember, you're awesome. Never let the world tell you otherwise. And thanks for letting me ramble and talk about my father a bit. Maybe you gain a little something from it. See ya.